Nintendo had Mario, Sega had Sonic the Hedgehog, and for Sony during the formative years of their first console, nothing was more synonymous with the PlayStation brand than Crash Bandicoot. But like their gaming hardware predecessors, Sony's PlayStation also had other characters to hang their head on thanks to the games they were associated with being some of the best on the market. Characters like Ratchet and Clank. The minds at Insomniac Game Studios worked hard to discover their next big game following the success of Spyro, eventually converging on what would become the first game in the Ratchet and Clank series, another successful 3D action-adventure shooter and platformer. Following multiple entries in the franchise, Insomniac's developers grew tired of working on the series. With the advent of Sony's PlayStation 5 came the revelation of Insomniac being back in the game both literally and figuratively by revealing what seemed to be the truest testament of what Sony's newest console could produce. With the introductory trailer sporting new gameplay elements and characters, I knew I was in store for the Ratchet and Clank of a lifetime with Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. Like many multi-genre experiences of its time, Rift Apart sports a plethora of things to do, from completing missions both main and side, to collecting trinkets and items to unlock even more trinkets and items. Journeying through the game's 9 planets is either Ratchet or the new playable character Rivet, a female Lombax who plays exactly like her contemporary right down to sporting the same type of armor and weaponry. The player is given the chance to experience so much from crazy battles, to skating down an electrified rail, to shooting across the desert in hover boots. Thankfully, the game doesn't ask for the player to attain all the collectibles or finish every side mission, though the rewards for doing so are beneficial, including attaining the aforementioned armor, new gadgets, and currency to buy some outrageous weapons, such as a gun that temporarily turns enemies into ice cubes. After nearly 20 hours, I collected almost everything the game had to offer, from the 10 spy bots to 60 Zerp stones, with the latter providing a fire-breathing dragon, overcame the final boss, and started a New Game Plus Challenge Mode playthrough, due to the 2 specific weapons only being available in New Game Plus, and getting my final trophies to attain my 75th Platinum. As expected from a Ratchet and Clank game no matter the era, Rift Apart melds third-person shooting with platforming by having vertically inclined arenas with hordes of enemies that range from frogs that will chase Rivet to the ends of the planet, to a bunch of energy-shooting adversaries that look like high-end versions of aliens seen in movies from the 1950s. Ratchet and Rivet can double jump, dash, and hammer to melee strike foes close and somewhat far by throwing said hammer. But what really makes the combat fun is the weapon selection. Rivet and Ratchet can use the money obtained through doing almost anything from slaughtering enemies to bashing boxes, to buy whatever new gadget is available, including a water sprinkler that causes overgrowth on hit enemies to temporarily freeze them. Other projectiles include Mr. and Mrs. Fungi that distract enemies and fire lasers for a short period of time. Guns are just as impressive, such as the drill helm that shoots exploding drill bits, and the rocket launcher style Warmonger. Players can only map 4 weapons at a time to the D-pad, but the player can open up the time-slowing weapon wheel at any time to select a new item or switch one weapon for another on the D-pad as a shortcut. Weapons can be upgraded via points earned by simply playing the game, exploring, and completing missions. These upgrades can do everything from increasing the maximum amount of ammo a weapon has, to actually unlocking sub-upgrades, like better damage or a wider spread when shooting someone, by activating the upgrades around the golden icons located on the weapon skill tree. The weapon skill trees only become fully available when said weapon reaches level 5, with the leveling coming courtesy of experience points earned by killing enemies with said weapon. Unfortunately, one of the game's biggest draws is also one of its most disappointing aspects: time rifts. Using a rift tether, Ratchet or Rivet can teleport to different areas of an arena during a battle, and that's it in regards to combat. Instead of doing things like transporting a fight into another zone or universe, Rift tether action in a fight is just a quick traversal option best used to avoid being surrounded or defeating that last standing foe near the rift. Interestingly enough, it's items like the Blizzon crystals that do shifting through dimensions better than using the rift tether in combat. On the opposite end of the spectrum, tethering through the rifts when moving around a planet adds a wonderful layer of exploration, including discovering hidden areas holding both platforming puzzles and armor pieces, the latter providing buffs when put on, including increasing melee damage or getting more experience points for weapons and the protagonist's own levels that increases their health. Platforming and traversal in general is definitely the game's most consistently fun aspect, alongside the weaponry. Thanks to the multiple gadgets given to Rivet and Ratchet throughout the story, players can use items like moon boots to defy gravity and reach that once impossible to obtain collectible. There are other platforming and puzzle sections specific to Clank and new antivirus character Glitch that mix things up. Clank's portions are more puzzle-oriented brain teasers that can be skipped if it's too difficult, but shouldn't be that hard for most to overcome. Glitch's sections involve running and gunning viruses that become increasingly numerous and deadly. Another disappointing aspect in regards to the combat and overall gameplay is mostly connected to the biggest of enemies. There is a lot of variety in regards to a majority of the enemies Rivet and Ratchet will overcome, but when it comes to bosses, the game is lacking. After the first two bosses experienced in 3 to 4 hours, the player isn't given a chance to fight another grand monstrosity in quite some time outside of the Battle Cup side mission areas. Instead, the player must take on hordes of the same enemies fought before and the constantly reappearing Juggernaut that doesn't do a single thing different from the initial time the player fights it on the first planet to its appearance during the final hour. Narratively, Rift Apart is actually incredibly mature, without forgetting the franchise's childish aesthetics. After the events of the original story, Clank looks to help his buddy discover other Lombaxes, like Ratchet, by using the Dimensionator. Dr. Nefarious arrives to ruin Clank's plans and results in the revelation of a universe where Nefarious becomes the world's emperor. Though Rivet is just Ratchet differently skinned in regards to gameplay, her character is anything but a feminized version of Ratchet. Rivet's story of being a revolutionary in a world headed by a version of Nefarious that makes Dr. Nefarious look like a fool in comparison allows for players to see a war-hardened character who is emotionally flawed. Rivet isn't the only flawed protagonist thanks to the introduction of Kit, a robot in the same vein as Clank visually, but nothing like his counterpart personality-wise. The alternate take of NPCs from previous games aren't superior to the new NPCs introduced, including those connected to side missions that are used to give some more personality to the worlds and its inhabitants, also providing some challenging scenarios like the aforementioned battle arena. From a technical aspect, the game looks absolutely gorgeous, with quick load times when moving from planet to planet. The only loading times that occur when on a planet is when the protagonist dies and the game reloads a checkpoint. Though the checkpoint system is very good and consistent, the game does have some stability issues that are seemingly isolated to a small portion of the narrative, following the third planet. Stuff like hard crashes and even the game being stuck in slow motion until the player restarts a checkpoint. Thankfully, major crashes usually result in only losing a couple of seconds to a few minutes of gameplay. Rift Apart takes advantage of the PS5's DualSense controller by putting pressure on the triggers to change how someone shoots a weapon, like one gun presenting a shield when the right trigger is held halfway down, before propelling said shield like a bullet when the trigger is pulled all the way down. There are a plethora of accessibility options including color blindness mode and the like. Rift Apart really doesn't do much different than what was seen before it in its genre, but what it does do, it does oh so well. The gameplay is fun and frenetic, while the story is definitely well thought out and executed. The platforming and puzzle sections are fantastic, though the usage of rifts during combat leaves something to be desired. Thankfully, this experience isn't just all style and no substance, being another must-play Insomniac Games product. There's no denying that Rift Apart is one of the best early PlayStation 5 exclusives, thanks to all the positives that occurs when jumping from world to world, beating up baddies to make them explode into bolts and nuts, a wonderful narrative, and just staring at the gorgeous visuals from start to finish. Rift Apart isn't perfect, thanks to a few stability issues, lacking gameplay differences when switching between Ratchet and Rivet, and its overall short nature if someone isn't playing more than once. But the positives definitely outweigh the negatives to make this a must-own PS5 game. Seriously, who wouldn't want to own a game where you can soar through the skies thanks to some hover boots and literally change reality?
My fellow trooper will return to the Emperor's cold yet tested and forever.
Cannot get inside until we power the generator.
Told you, I do not make a great partner.
Sure, that was intense, but it was kind of awesome.